Hello everyone, thanks for joining me for another Tips Tuesday video. Today I'm just at home in my office and we're going to be talking about planning our outing. So a lot of us have a limited amount of time out in the field. So we want to make use of that time to hopefully be able to find the species we want to photograph and hopefully come home with some images, right? A lot of times with wildlife photography, the hardest part is just finding the wildlife to photograph. Now this video might be a little bit longer than my usual Tips Tuesday videos. I'm trying to keep it short and concise, but there's a lot of information you can get into here. So just bear with me, and I hope the information that is in this is useful for you. So let's get into it. If you've watched my videos in the past, then you know that I'm a huge advocate for learning as much about the subjects you're photographing as you can, learn their behaviors, learn what they eat, what kind of habitat they're going to be in. And this is kind of where all of that information comes from. So before I go out into the field, I usually do some sort of research and preparation ahead of time. There's nothing wrong with going out and just kind of exploring a new habitat, a new location, and just kind of seeing what you can find, and maybe you might get lucky having a good encounter. But most of the time, I'm going to be doing this at home before I head out. So today, this video is just going to be talking about the steps and resources that I use and the steps that I take to plan an outing, and the things of kind of information that I'm looking for before I head out to hopefully be successful in photographing the species. So to get started, I usually start in one of two ways. Either I start as kind of looking at a specific habitat I want to head out to and photograph in, or I do a species-specific kind of approach that I want to photograph and find a specific species to photograph. So we're going to start with the habitat idea first. Okay, so if I'm thinking that I want to just head out to a specific habitat, the first thing I do is I have a list of locations that are close to me. And in that list, I have kind of it categorized as what kind of habitats are in each of those locations. Now, I created this list kind of through years of experience and going to different locations and exploring different locations. So I kind of have a nice repertoire of which habitats are in different locations. If I want to go to a specific kind of habitat and photograph in that habitat, I have a narrowed down list already of which locations I should go to. Now, what if you're new to an area or you're trying to explore new locations, you're not sure what habitat's going to be found at certain locations? What you can do is just kind of head over to the internet, look online. I use Google Maps. You can do Google searches and just type in, parks or locations around you, wildlife refuges around you. And you'll come up with a whole bunch of different results just right there that you can then explore further. The location might have a website you can click on and see photos of the park. You might be able to kind of see things based on Google Maps and the satellite images and try to figure out what kind of habitat is in that park. A lot of times you can tell if there's a field, if there's forest, you can kind of get an idea of if it's going to be a deciduous forest or a conifer forest. You can see if there's any water in that park. Another thing you can do is take it even a step further is go ahead and do street view on that location that you're exploring. Go around the streets around the park or leading up to the park and kind of get an idea of what the forest looks like, or if it's going to be fields or open areas. You can kind of get a sense of what you're going to be walking into before you even show up there. So that's a good way to kind of explore locations without actually having to go there and explore them yourself. Obviously, there's no substitute for actually going out there and exploring on your own, because you're going to have so much more information if you're actually there, boots on the ground, looking around the habitat. But this is a good way to kind of start and have an idea of what you're going to be walking into before you get there. Now, if you're doing just kind of, you want to photograph in a specific habitat and explore that habitat, you could just end right there, right? Or you can take it a step further. And now that you know a location that you're going to go to, you know that the habitat you want to photograph in is at that location. Next, you can take it and figure out, okay, what kind of species am I going to find there in that habitat this time of year? A great spot to start is looking on, obviously I do a lot of bird photography. eBird is a great, sorry, my dog is getting up. He's making all sorts of noise. A great location to start is, if you're photographing birds, is look on eBird. It's a free app you can look and you can explore. Chances are the location you're going to go photographing in has a hotspot that you can then click on, and you'll have an entire list of the species that have been reported there. You'll have a list of species that are likely to be found there. And then you also have these bar charts, which explain basically the abundance of the species throughout the year. So it's really important, especially if you have species that are going to be migrating through the area and only in the area for a certain amount of time. You can look at these bar charts and say, okay, this species is going to be located there in March. And I need to go there in March to photograph it because that's the only time that it stops and then it moves on. So it's really useful information. And eBird is also a great service if you're going to be trying to explore and find new locations to go photograph in. Maybe you're trying to locate new spots. This is a good spot to look. If you're trying to figure out what might be a good birding spot, you can look on eBird, explore the area around you, and look at the different hotspots around you, and that might give you a good suggestion based on how many species have been found there recently. And these eBird hotspots, when you click on them, as you kind of develop your understanding of species and their habitat preferences, even just clicking on the hotspot link and seeing what species have been reported there recently will give you a good indication of what kind of habitat you're going to be walking into, because obviously certain species are only found in certain habitats. So this really helps you narrow down where to go and species to find. But it also gives you this idea of, okay, I'm going to go to, let's just say I'm going to go to a conifer forest to photograph in a conifer forest. Okay, based on the knowledge that I have and the information on this eBird hotspot, I know that there's going to be small songbirds or mixed flocks of small songbirds in that habitat when I'm there. So then I know what lenses to bring. I know what settings I should have my camera dialed into so I can get ready for fast action with small birds. So you can kind of be prepared as you walk in instead of just kind of arriving at the scene and then not knowing what you're going to step into. So taking it that one step further and understanding what species are likely going to be in that habitat is just going to make you that much more prepared, which is, it's all about being prepared to hopefully have success when you're out in the field. So that's if you're looking at kind of just the basic, I want to go and photograph in a specific habitat. Let's find that habitat and go out to that habitat. Now, if I'm looking for photographing a specific species, you kind of take it a couple steps further, and it's a more in-depth process. But as you go more in depth, the more information you learn about the species, the higher chance you're going to find the species and hopefully make some interesting photos of that species. And really the first place to start that I use are guidebooks. Again, I'm talking mostly about birds here, but I also have some mammal information guides as well. And it's really the same kind of concepts with mammals as well. So there are field guides for birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, all sorts of things. Obviously, a great spot to start is looking at the field guides, seeing what species are around you. They're great references for being able to identify species, understanding how to identify species, especially when you have a lot of different species that are similar looking. They're harder to identify. These field guides really help you pick out and identify the species that you're looking to photograph. They also have range maps in here so you can figure out where the species is likely to be located. And they kind of indicate if the species is going to be migrating through or if it's a resident species there. I have the National Geographic version. There's all sorts of different name brand versions, Audubon, Sibley, Peterson, all different great field guides for birds. I have the Audubon guides as well. So definitely a good spot to start. Mammals have the same thing, just different names. So it's a great spot to start there as well. Another great reference guide that I use a lot, and this one is for mammals, is Mammal Tracks and Signs. So this is a great book. It has a lot of different tracks and signs. It has scat. It has all sorts of markings that animals leave behind. So it really helps you identify species in an area. When you're out in the field, you can actually identify what species you see based on the tracks that you're finding, which really helps you understand the habitat preferences for species. When you actually see tracks of the wildlife that you're looking for in a specific habitat, you get to then kind of concrete the idea that this location is good for this specific species because they're clearly moving through this area or they're hunting in this area and use this habitat. So this is a guide that I really use a lot. And I'll put the links to these books that I use down below if you're interested. So that's just a basic figuring out what species are in your area, right? Number one. Number two, once I know that the species is going to be in a specific region of the area, I want to go and kind of delve deeper into that species. So things that I'm going to be looking for is going to be habitat preferences for that species, right? You need to know where that species is going to be located now that you have kind of the range that the species is found in. Next, you're going to want to know what that species eats. If there's no food around for that species, you're not going to find that species around. So that's really important. Next, you're going to want to know if the species is migrating through, when that species migrates through. You're going to want to know when that species is active. So is it a nocturnal species? Is it active during the day? And then you're going to want to know, where does that species kind of sleep? Is it going to den down? Are you going to be looking for dens? Are you going to be looking for tree cavities? What are you going to be looking for to help you understand how this animal uses the landscape? So those are the things that I'm going to be looking for when I'm researching species. Now, there's a couple tools that you can use. Obviously, the first one you can do is just a simple search engine result and look up, and I use Google for everything. You can look up, say, habitat preferences for red fox. You can look up, you're going to have a lot of different results right there. You can look through a lot of state agencies, wildlife agencies have information on the species that are found in the state. So you can find a lot of things out that way about habitat preferences, food preferences, how and when the animal moves around the landscape. They also have information about tracks as well. So that's an easy spot to look. For mammals, it's a little bit harder because there's not one central database for information like there is for birds. Birds have been heavily researched, so we're really fortunate to have a lot of information about birds really easily at our fingertips. Mammals, it's still there, but it's going to be a little bit harder. You have to dig a little bit deeper to find things. Another thing that I commonly do for mammals is I look at scholarly articles, so basically scientific journal articles for research that has been done on the species that I'm looking for. This kind of gives you a really in-depth look about the research that's been done on the animals. It tells you a lot about habitat preferences, food preferences, feeding behaviors, that sort of thing. Things that you're not going to find in a normal field guide based on that species. But you can see how you kind of can get down a rabbit hole and really learn a lot about different species. But obviously, you don't need to learn that much if you're not interested in going that far. But these are things that I do to learn more about species. For birds, it's a little bit easier. Obviously, things are still online, but you can look on different sources. eBird is a great source of looking up information. In there, you can actually click on the species that you're interested in, and it takes you right to a Cornell Lab of Ornithology page. You can look up another Cornell Lab of Ornithology page is all about birds. You can search in and type in a species there. It spits out a lot of information about the basics of that species, habitat preferences, feeding, all different kind of life history aspects of that species you're looking at. And another Cornell Lab of Ornithology source is actually a membership source, so you have to pay to use this source. But this is the one source that I use for all of my bird research needs. If I want to get really deep into the preferences and behaviors of a specific species of bird, I look at this source. This is the kind of source that I used through my college career, doing papers on species, researching species. This is what I used. It's pretty much the gold standard of information about birds. But on this source, you're able to learn really in-depth information, scientific data about species, location, habitat, feeding behavior, breeding behavior, nest selection, predation. Talks about conservation issues with certain species. So you can really learn a lot about a species in one spot, and that's why it's so important, and really the source that I use for all of my information. And if you want to go even further, you can get books on bird behavior. This is a great source that I've read a couple of times now. It talks about all sorts of bird behavior, understanding why and how birds interact with the world. You can get things on mammals as well, in the same kind of context of understanding kind of preferences for different habitats and how they move about habitats in certain time of year. So these are some of the things that I do before I head out the door. It really helps to improve your success rate when you go out into the field to hopefully find a species that you're looking for. And it really just helps you appreciate the wildlife you're photographing that much more. The more you learn about the species that you're out in the field with, the more you're able to see how they interact and how they're supposed to interact and how they interact with their habitat. Really helps you create more interesting photographs of that species, because you're not only just taking documentary photographs of the species, you're actually photographing that species interacting with the habitat as it's supposed to, which is really a neat thing to do when you're actually able to find a species doing what it's supposed to be doing in nature, and you're actually able to capture that with your camera. So I hope this helps. There's a lot of information you can get into. I'm just trying to keep it short here. But those are kind of some of the resources that I use and some of the things that I look for before I go out into the field to hopefully improve my chances of finding the wildlife. Obviously, with a caveat of wildlife, you can't control wildlife, right? So even if you have all this information, you're not necessarily going to still find that species in the habitat that you think it might be in. But having that understanding and learning about the species beforehand really helps you gain a deeper insight into that species. So that's going to be it for this Tips Tuesday video. I hope you enjoyed. If there's any sources of information that you use that I didn't mention, leave it in the comments below. Let the groups know, people that are watching know. We're all trying to be better wildlife photographers and understand the species around us. So share it with the group. And that's going to be it. Next Tuesday, the Tips Tuesday video is going to be on understanding, now that we know what species we're going to be going out to photograph in, how I set up my camera and kind of the basics of camera settings when I set up to hopefully be successful when I actually find and photograph these species. So that'll be next Tuesday. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.